Yes, sir.
You know what I got here in these flasks? Well, if you read, what does it say?
Artery blood and vein blood.
Very good. What do you think is the most common question that people ask?
I don't know. What would it be?
Is the blood inside your body really blue?
Is the blood really blue? Well, actually, no, it's not. You don't have a drop of blue blood anywhere in your body. Now, it all has to do with how much oxygen is in your blood. Your arteries, for the most part, have lots of oxygen, and that's why it's a nice red color. Your vein blood, the venous blood, is oxygen poor. It's got a lot of carbon dioxide in it, and that's why it really is this color, sort of like
it's like a purplish color.
Like a purplish color.
Or
maroon.
Yeah,
it's got a maroon tint.
Dull red.
So whether the blood's in veins or in the arteries, the vehicle for bringing the blood around are called blood vessels. Now there's three types of blood vessels. There's and it's sort of like a tree in the wintertime. You know, you've got twigs and you got stems and you got branches.
Well, then you got that big old tree.
There you go. So the twigs are the smallest of the blood vessels, and I'm using these little swizzle sticks to represent the capillaries, they're called. Notice how much smaller they are than the next size up, which are called arterioles or venules. These would be like the stems on a tree. And then, of course, we have the larger arteries and veins. And it's important to know that whether it's capillaries, arterioles, or arteries and veins, it's smooth muscle that's wrapped around these vessels that is what squeezes and helps force the blood. But the main force for the blood comes from the heart. And so if you've been to a doctor's office, you've probably seen them measure how much pressure is in the blood vessels when they wrap this around your arm and they squeeze this bulb, and they can measure your blood pressure. A normal blood pressure for an adult is around 120/80. We'll talk more about that later on.
Okay, so the key is understanding the difference between arteries, veins, and capillaries. As you saw, the arteries and veins much thicker than the capillaries. Okay, arteries are actually a little bit thicker than the veins are. Then they start to transition into smaller, like Mr. Reynolds said, branches. Okay, so you have blood leaving the heart through the aorta, the largest of our arteries, and then as it moves through and starts to branch off of these main arteries, and those branches, which you saw in the straws, start to get thinner, till eventually they thin out to what we call capillaries, where single blood cells travel through one at a time, so that way they can reach every single cell in the body. So that oxygen from that red blood cell could travel through the cell membrane into the cell. And carbon dioxide from the cell can travel through the cell membrane into the bloodstream. Then that blood goes through the capillaries to the veins. But again, branching off in an opposite manner, going into the smaller venules, leading into the larger veins, which bring the blood back to the heart.
So when we look at these charts that show us blue and red, yes, blue is supposed to denote the veins, red is supposed to denote the arteries, but really you've got no blue blood whatsoever. So sometimes students will say, how come when I look at the blood vessels in our skin, how come it looks like it's blue? That's because it's an optical illusion. As light travels through our lily white skin, it gets bent, refracted, and that's why we get that. So here you see just a small smidgen of what all these blood vessels and the smaller ones, the venules and the capillaries might look like. So anytime you get a bloody nose, the chances are pretty good that you burst a capillary in your nose. But you won't bleed to death, and that's the beautiful thing about your blood. Blood does so much besides help exchange gases, brings nutrients. What else does blood do, Mr. Maxwell, with the bleeding?
Well, the blood's components, okay? Blood is 55% plasma, 45% blood cells. Now, plasma is almost all water. Okay, actually 90% of the blood plasma, so 90% of that 55% is water. And then you have that other 10% is other solutions. That 45% of blood cells, you have red blood cells, which are responsible for carrying the oxygen to the cells and also carrying the carbon dioxide away from the cells. You have white blood cells, which are responsible for basically your immune system fighting the foreign invaders. And then you have platelets in your blood, which are responsible for clotting. So that way, when you have a cut, you don't just constantly bleed, that it clots. Now, the biggest thing you have to understand between arteries and veins, the arteries are thicker than veins. Okay, they're thicker. They're rich in oxygen. They bring blood away from the heart. Always away from the heart. Arteries away, AA. And the way blood moves through the arteries is through pressure that's created from the heart. Veins, on the other hand...
Well, what's that called when you can feel the surge of blood?
That's what your pulse is, that you can measure. Okay, it's actually the pressure as the blood travels through those arteries. There's a couple points, both in the wrist and the neck, and actually in the lower leg as well. The veins bring blood towards the heart. It's almost always oxygen poor. Usually it has carbon dioxide in it. Okay? Again, thinner than arteries. But one major difference, veins actually have valves to help push the blood through to get it back to the heart. It's no longer relying on the pressure from the heart. It's now using these valves to move it.
Well, it's not so much to push, but it's to stop the blood from going backwards. If you ever hung upside down, you probably notice all the blood rushing to your head because all the valves open up. Okay? So when you're just standing up, the blood has a certain amount of pressure in between beats. It starts to go back, and these valves close,